Hi everyone. In part 1 of this tutorial, we saw how to process continuously coming data using the file connector and rename it and back it up with Mule. And in this part, we are going to see when we have data that is coming continuously, how do we write it into a database. So I will be using my SQL and Workbench. And if you want to follow along, and if you don't have Workbench and MySQL installed already, you can search on YouTube how to install MySQL and Workbench and install them. And the other thing is also I will use some Python code, very easy Python code to generate data at regular intervals and save it to my working directory. So, and I will add this Python code into my GitHub repository, and I will add a link to my GitHub repository in the description section. Okay, so let's first create a project. Go here, new Mule project, and let's call it write to database. So from the modules, we want here the file module. So what we are doing is when there is new data coming into our working directory, we want to process it and send it to a database, insert it to a database. So we click this, drag it here, and specify under basic settings here, we have the connector configuration. So here I am specifying my working directory. So I will be saving data to this folder, to this data folder. And here under directory is the same thing, I'm specifying my directory, and I want to read only CSV file, so I can specify the file pattern that I want it to process and send to the database. So here we have the file name pattern, so I can put asterisk.csv, it means all CSV files. And the scheduling strategy here, I want it at fixed intervals. I want MuleSoft to check every 5 seconds if there are new files and to process them. And I want it to the files to be deleted from their original location and get backed up to another folder, my backup location. And for convenience also, let's rename them, let's give them some new names, so we can prepend some keyword. So first let's switch this to expression mode by clicking this fx so that we can access the attribute.file name. Then here I can concatenate renamed underscore the original file name. So it will, each original file name will have renamed prepended to it. So file name. So if the file name was, for example, today.csv, then the new file name, when it gets moved to the working directory, will be renamed underscore today.csv. Okay, and let's save this, and we can add a logger. We can add a logger here. If you go under the core module, we have logger here, put it here. And the same thing, let's change this to an expression mode, and we want to see which files are being processed. So we can write here attributes dot file name being processed. This will be printed to the console. Now we want to transform the data, so we want this transform message still from the core module and put it here. So since my data is in CSV, each row will be an object. So I just need this to change this to JSON and change this to payload. So each row will be an object, and when we insert the data to a database, it is going to write each row separately, one row at a time. So in this case, we can use the for each operation from the core module. So under this for each, that means for each record, for each row, let's have first a logger that shows we want to see the data to be printed to the console here. So change this to expression mode and write payload here. I want the payload to be printed to the console. That means each row at a time. And then I want to insert my data. I want to send my data to a database, MySQL in this case. So I can go to database module, and under that I have this insert operation. So I can bring it here. So here I have to specify the connection, and I have workbench open here. So let's create a database. Create database, and let's call it MuleSoft. And let's create a table here. First use MuleSoft, switching to that database, and I will create a table. So the table that I'm going to create will have these columns. To save time, I have it written here, so I can paste it here. So it will have person ID, last name, first name, address, and CD. So the data that I'm going to generate will have also the same columns, and it will be in CSV format. So run this. Now if I refresh my schemas, I should see the database I created and also the table. So MuleSoft is here, and if you go to persons table, I see the columns that the persons table should have, and there is no data right now. If I just click here and try to display data, I see column names are here and there are no rows. So now from Anypoint Studio, let's connect to that database. Click here and we specify the connector configuration here by pressing this. Connection is MySQL, and driver, just click configure and add Maven dependency. This is fine. You can just click finish here, and I will specify host, port, and so on. So this is localhost because it is in my laptop, and the port for MySQL is 3306. My user is root, and I have a password that I created for this tutorial, a dummy password. So I can copy this and paste it here. How to specify the database also, the database we just created, which is MuleSoft. Now let's try connection, test connection. Okay, the connection is successful. Now once we connect to that, we have to specify the SQL query text, and I have that here. This is my query text. So as I said, we are sending each row at a time separately from the CSV file. So this is what we are doing. So we specify here insert into the persons table, and these are the columns and their values. We have their values are we are passing their values, as you can see, as named column names, and the values of each of these we are going to get them from the input parameters. So under this input parameters, we first click this fx to change it to an expression mode, and the values of the different columns we specify it like this. So here, let me maximize this. So what we are doing here is the person ID in the SQL query text, it should get it from the payload.person ID, and the last name from payload to last name, and so on, as you can see. So here we have transformed under the transform message, we have transformed the CSV data, and for each we'll separate each row, and from each row is an object. So from each object, which is a payload, we can access the different values for the columns and create this dictionary, and from this dictionary this SQL query text can access the values of each column here. So now I think we are done. We can just test. Let's go and generate data. So this is my working directory, there is no data there, and the backup is this one. Let me clear this also, make sure there isn't any data. And so here I have some Python code that generates continuous data, and let me show you the data, what it looks like. So I'm generating some dummy data with the same columns, and each data file will have 10 rows. I'm generating not only CSV data, I'm going to write not only CSV data but also images, but I want Anypoint Studio only to pick the CSV files. So now let's write data to the working directory images, plotters and CSV files every 3 seconds is what I'm doing. So run this, I will run this, and I will connect to my SQL here and check the number of okay, let me create, I think, another notebook here, another Python environment, since this one is busy running generating data. I want to check the number of rows in that database. So check number of rows. So here, from here, I want to see, as Anypoint Studio, as MuleSoft inserts data to that database, I should see the number of rows increasing. So I specify the host, support, database name, user, and password of MySQL, and this is how I connect with Python. There is this package called PyMySQL, but anyway, I can just copy these packages and import them here. So if I run this now, I'm checking every 3 seconds the number of rows there. So it says the number of rows is 0. Probably I will start this one as I start dumping data, because it is just 0 now. So I will stop it. Okay, this one it is generating data. Let's check, see how many data files it has dumped already. So we see it has saved lots of data files, and it is saving more data files every 3 seconds, as you can see. Now let's go and run our run our project here. Run project. Okay, so it is going to, in the logger here on the console, it is going to tell us the files, which files it is processing, give us some high level information, and also to check that it is working, we are going to check the number of rows, see if the number of rows in the table is increasing. So this is deploying. Now it has deployed. So you can see here it is telling us which files it is being processed. The number of rows now should be Yeah, we see 717 rows, 730. It is increasing as it processes. Run this and go to here. The number of rows now increases because it is inserting new data that is being generated. See 750 and so on, because I'm inserting about 10 rows at a time, 10 rows at a time. So we can go also to here, we can see it while it is generating. All the CSV files are being processed and moved to the backup location, and they are also being renamed, whereas the plotters, it is just leaving them there. We can go to the backup location and we see CSV files, renamed CSV files being backed up. And if you go to the console here, we see it is printing the payload and giving us some information here. Like for this one, it shows the file name, as you can see here, .csv being processed. Then this file name, since it has 10 rows, we see 10 payloads being printed down here. So 10 objectives, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So if we go here and open one of the files, so we see it has person ID, last name, first name, address, and CD. So for each, it writes to the database each row separately, And in the console also, the payload, it is printing the second logger. It is printing each row to the console. That's what we see here. So this is one row, this is another row, this is another row, and so on. So this is how we write data to a database when we using the file module, when we have some data coming to our working directory using the for each function. And in our next tutorial, we are going to see what if we want to write the data to different databases. For example, to for fault tolerance, for example, I may want to back up my data both to a couple of databases, or like for example to MySQL and Postgres at the same time. So we are going to see how we can write data to two databases in parallel.